Hi, everyone. I'm excited to get us started. My name is Natalie Zaragoza Harris. I am a third-year PhD student in the developmental psychology area here at UCLA, and I will be moderating our first session. And so quickly, I will give a brief introduction of both our panelists here, our speakers, sorry. So Ron is the director of the Institute of Human Development and a professor in the Community Health Sciences and Joint Medical Program, all at UC Berkeley. And he's also chair of UCLA CDA's advisory board and was the founding director of CDA, the Center for the Developing Adolescent. Great. And so Jamila is the Associate Director of Innovation and Youth Programming at the Bronfenbrenner Center for Translational Research and the New York State 4-H Civic Engagement Specialist with Cornell Cooperative Extension's New York State 4-H program. And somehow, in addition to all of those things, she's also a PhD student in global development in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at Cornell. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you both today. And so our question that we will be discussing is what is unique about exploratory learning during adolescence? So let's start with Jamila. Can you talk a little bit about what you think is unique about exploratory learning during adolescence and how that plays into 4-H specifically?
Sure. I don't know if my mic is on or what.
Sounds like it's
on. Are we good now?
Yeah.
Excellent. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, I think what's really unique is that it's a wonderful time, right, to look for those sparks, right? When are those young people coming alive? When are they, right? When's that light behind their eyes really, coming alive when they're involved and engaged in an activity? And, when are the times when it's like, oh, it's a little dull, right? I'm not really sure what's happening here. I'd like to move on and do something different. We totally look for opportunities for those sparks to be enlightened, right? So whether they're events and activities that they've decided for themselves, hopefully it hasn't just been a parent that's decided for them that they're going to be working on something, but that they've had that internal inspiration to say, hey, this is something I want to try out. And we also create lots of opportunities to challenge by choice, right? So that they might be scared, like some of those quotes that were up there are actually from our 4-H members, right? That are like, I was terrified, right? Public presentations is something that is innate to our programs and integrated, and our young people love it afterwards, after the award ceremony happens. But during the process of preparing for those speeches, doing a recitation, being involved in those experiences, they're like, this is incredibly scary. How can you talk in front of a ton of people and keep your mind focused on what's happening in the space? And so we create those opportunities for them to stretch themselves and to stretch themselves with limits, right? So that we're there providing resources and support and providing that guidance so that they're not on their own, and that there's a fair amount of hand-holding. And then I would say one of the other larger pieces is that we try to create an opportunity for a real family environment. So a lot of our 4-H alumni will say that they've left our youth development program, and the biggest thing that they got is a core group of family, right? Whether they be their peers, their extension leaders, educators, volunteers, but they're engaged in a positive family environment, right? So all of these folks are here to support them, to lift them up, and to notice, right? So if I was here for a longer conference, you'd see every day I have on some other bright color, right? That's just who I am as a person. And our young people are noticing every little thing that we're doing, right? So in the days that I'm dressed in black, they're like, Miss Jamila, you're not feeling well, because we know you're all about color, right? And we want to be that caring adult for each of those young people so that we're noticing, right? You had a wonderful day today, and I just want to notice that. I want to send a text message to your parent. I want to send a text message to that volunteer, right? Keep exploring this particular thread, because this person really lit up when we were, on the roof of a building in New York City, right? Growing whatever it is hydroponically, right? Or we were down in the basement, right? And we were looking at the tilapia. And so noticing those experiences is largely important, and then gently moving them through those experiences so that they can begin to flourish, right? And so then you serve, not just as a caring adult, but something we talked about at our tabletop conversations last night, a spark champion, right? So you can continue to encourage them on and put them in the path of other caring adults that will help to get them on that thriving trajectory.
I love that. I love that term, spark champion. That's very cool. Ron, have you seen this play out in your research, coming more from both a medical sort of practitioner standpoint and developmental scientist? What have you noticed that's unique about exploratory learning during adolescence, and how might this play into what Jamila has already pointed out?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I want to connect with all the wisdom and insights you're capturing and the practical insights related to these changes. And I think it's an interesting question scientifically to say what is unique about learning and exploration in adolescence. And I think at one level, I would say there's not anything unique except the configuration of pieces that are amplified and come together in a fundamentally new way. And so it's a bit of a paradox. We're often challenged, like, well, there's continuities and discontinuities in development. That's like the main theme. And yet, what's the discontinuity other than, puberty? But it's not. Kids can keep growing throughout childhood, but then there's a growth spurt. There are amplifications of sensitivity to social feedback. There's an increased proclivity to explore. There's an increased tendency to find novel and ambiguous situations more enjoyable. But they're subtle changes, but they come together and they're shaping not only exploration of self and other and relationships and larger place in the world and identity and natural proclivities, but they're coming together in a unique configuration. Part of the magic of young people and the fact that they can light up when the thrill of admiration is greater, and the aversiveness of being disrespected, put down, unfairness. There's this amped up sense of social value feedback salience. Unpacking that, all of us want to be admired. None of us want to be disrespected or put down. But the intensity of the feelings connected to that are turned up. So it's not unique, but it's unique because those are ramped up at a time young people are searching in broader ways for who they are in a larger world. Mm-hmm. I love the quote. I was thinking about this was a symposium we had I think almost 18 years ago now that brought together a lot of disciplines studying adolescence, the New York Academy of Sciences meeting. And it was a Frederick Buechner quote about his agonizing over his own adolescence and working with young people. And he said, "We search on our journeys for a self to be, other selves to love, and meaningful work to do." And I like Andrew and the group's idea of contribution is even broader than work, but this idea of a way to matter. And what's wonderful is that there are these opportunities for spirals as these configuration of changes come together around identity, around these sensitive and amplified emotions. That can create spirals. And for 20 years, most of the research on adolescence and adolescent brain development was because of the negative spirals, addiction and depression and mental health problems and aggression and violence. But the same spirals that are so concerning because they can go negative can be positive. And so we want to matter. We want to matter even more when we're adolescents. But if we can do that by contributing, by doing things that matter, by having someone recognizing, the thrill is intensified for the positive spirals just as much as the aversion of being put down and diminished. And so a lot of the common wisdom of I think most people who have worked with in these age groups, you recognize it's a precarious time. It can turn negative so fast. One little put down, one little lack of recognizing what they did, or from peers, from other people they admire, can begin that larger negative. But we really, and it's part of the mission of the center, look at the opportunity frame. It is such an amazing time that this configuration of pieces around changes in learning and motivation. I love the term heartfelt goals. It's not just your goals, and it's not just your passions and feelings. They're becoming connected in new ways in these neural systems. And it's not just heartfelt goals. There's also what people will call mindsets. A growth mindset isn't just thinking you're going to get better if you try something. It's feeling that it's true, and you start believing it. But there are several kinds of mindsets about being generous, about being kind, about being trusting, about being a good person, about contributing to your community, about being part of a larger family. These become, they're not just personality factors, they're not just learned ways of thinking, they're connecting ways of thinking and goals to what feels true to you for your identity. And that then you have natural proclivities to want to do more of those. And so I think it's part of the complexity that this involves several pieces, and yet the principles are simple. If we can recognize young people, if we can help not just empower them, but really admire when they're contributing, when they're stretching, when they're, I love the phrase challenge by choice, because they want autonomy. That's another aspect that they really want the independence and autonomy, and they want the nudge and support. And so the balance of the yin and yang in that space, and you see people who are so good at inspiring young people. They just tune in the right ways to give the nudge, make the comment, back away, and they don't have any of the theory. They just they get that configuration of pieces. And similarly, there are programs and approaches that might get 2 or 3 pieces and miss something, and it just doesn't work. And so there's magic in the best sense as these pieces come together.
You know, I really like how you said we all want to matter. And this is especially true in adolescence. And I know I was looking a little bit into 4-H, and it seems like there's sort of 4 core areas, and you were mostly associated with the civic engagement area. Can you respond a little bit to what Ron was saying about wanting to matter and how in adolescence and how this really plays into the civic engagement piece of 4-H and how you see that play out?
Sure. Yeah, so within 4-H youth development, we do have 4 pillar areas. So our largest pillar area that most people know is ag, although I think about it as sustainable food systems, right? That's our largest pillar area. Civic engagement comes underneath there. We also have healthy eating and active living, and STEM, or STEAM, right? Whatever acronym you're looking to go by. And for civic engagement, right, we really want for those young people to be developing that character and then turning beyond oneself, right, and looking towards community and creating opportunities to help build capacity within community. And so I love this pillar area because, right, the sky's the limit, right? I could be working with young people in lots of different environments to really create change. And how we do that is really by creating that deep sense of belonging, right? So they get oriented in their space and oriented within community, oriented within our university because we're at Cornell and we love to connect kids to Cornell, and then oriented in the larger world, right? So 4-H youth development, right? Young people across America, but we also have programs in the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. We have international programs in Japan, Costa Rica, and our young people travel to have those experiences as well. And so we want to create those opportunities to ground them locally and then to think about the much broader, efforts. And that sense of belonging really helps to ground them as they're thinking about what is it that I'm doing to build capacity within my local community, and then how do I scale that up, right? So after I depart from here, I'm headed to a leadership retreat that we're hosting. We always engage in community service, right? So when we think about civic engagement, we could think about community service as being one rung of an opportunity. We like to ramp that up, right? Youth voice is really at the heart and the center of the work that I do in civic engagement. And so we create opportunities for young people to not just provide the person power behind doing capacity building projects, but that they decide on the topic, they do the build, they execute it, they evaluate it, right? And they really reflect on those experiences. And then we start that process all over again. So we've had young people mapping potholes in our cities, right? Making presentations to DPW around Department of Public Works around, right, this is what's working. Maybe you should think about the grade of materials that you're utilizing to map these potholes because they could be filled in for much longer. And these are teens that are driving on our roads too, right? So they have some real strong opinions about what should or shouldn't happen. And then giving a presentation, right? So they've spent the whole school year mapping those experiences. They know where the potholes are, they know how they should be filled, and then they're going to their elected officials and saying, hey, this is what we need you to do, right? Those are the types of experiences that we're looking to engage and to foster with our young people. And again, at the heart of that is that skill building. Those skills are transferable anywhere in America, right? They could be going to Google to work. They could come to Cornell and work in our office and beyond. They can be out, at the farm. They can be in engineering. And so we're wanting to develop those life skills we're also wanting them to also learn tangibly about their place within community and what it looks like, what it feels like when you're building that capacity. So once that's done, right, and those potholes are filled, right, they're telling their friends, listen, that pothole that was on North Main, I did that, right? So you can thank me, you can figure out, what you've saved on getting your car realigned, right? Pay me. So those are those real incredible experiences that we're talking about. And we're talking about 13 to 15, 16-year-olds that are doing this work. So imagine that when they're sitting in the space where you are, what things are running through their mind, what types of capacity that they're building. We'll break ground on a diversity cafe in the city of Binghamton very shortly. That was modeled by one young person who wanted to make sure that her identity was solidified and was front and central in our programs. And so that cafe will feature workforce preparation experiences, obviously, because there'll be jobs involved in that. It'll feature 4-H products that are locally grown and sourced, but it'll also feature some real strong conversations, right, about things that we think about every day, about war, about love, about respect, positive relationships, about dating violence, right? Any myriad of things that are happening. And so creating those opportunities to really ground young people and root them in that sense of belonging, connected to that identity, and that what they do now matters, right? So not just the voting piece, but what they actually do and what they can contribute in community matters now.
That's really cool. I love the idea. It was a diversity cafe. That's really awesome. Another follow-up for you. So Ron had brought up this research about the intensity of feeling, right? That this salience, and I know 4-H is grounded in a lot of developmental science and research. And I was sort of connecting what you had said about really giving them feedback and texting their parents when they see this, like, they did an amazing job today, right? So it seems like you incorporate a bit of this like high and low lows idea of adolescence in the feedback that you give them. Can you give like more examples of ways in which 4-H really uses this research on the intensity of feeling and maybe spirals in adolescence, and how does that play out in the programming?
Yeah, something else that we had talked about yesterday. So we love to use positive peer pressure, right? So we create many, many opportunities for our youth groups to govern themselves. So they hold elections, they decide who's going to be in charge, what sort of leadership structure they're going to have, and then they run themselves, right? So last night when I landed, we had a meeting. I don't know why these young people were waiting for me to join the meeting because they govern themselves. I'm just there to provide a Zoom link, like literally that's my role. And so they log in and they're like, Miss Jamila, oh, you're here, you made it. And so what's really exciting to me is once they govern themselves, I don't have to remind them about our working agreements, about how this is gonna work, about what the consequences are for non-attendance or any of those things. They're like, hey, listen, we all signed this code of conduct, right? Which is the minimum, expectation for how we conduct ourselves, not just here, but virtually and in community. And so if someone's not holding to that code of conduct and to those working agreements, they call each other on that, right? And so there are very few seeds that I have to plant in that realm. And there are times, certainly when I can, share with another young person, or if we have, collegiate facilitators that are coming in, hey, I want you to notice this thing about this particular young person, right? And so when we do our debrief, we can say, definitively, is this something that we're seeing, or is this something that we're not seeing? But we provide those opportunities for that positive peer pressure. We provide those opportunities for our young people to be involved and engaged in those planning processes. And we really do expect for them to call each other in, right, when need be, and not to draw each other out on the carpet, right? And so that's been really remarkable. Once they get set in that, right, and we're starting to introduce younger participants like our Clover Buds, which are between the ages of 5 to 9, and our preteens, they're doing the work, right, amongst each other. And they're also learning specifically about that language and about their own identity development and their own adolescent development so that they can, share with one another, right? This is what you're actually experiencing. And so that's really great for us as well.
Thank you for that answer. I think we have a couple more minutes. Okay, great. So something Jamila had brought up earlier was this idea of family. And in the sense, it sounds like the kids were sort of talking about, and the teenagers were talking about the sense of family that they get from the program, and from both the directors and other youth in the program with them. And I know you have a fair amount of research on the importance of family and cultural contexts in this period of life, and how it pertains to risk-taking and exploration. So how do you see some of these social factors and the broader environments in which adolescents are placed playing a role in this unique exploratory phase?
Yeah, so that brings up a couple pieces of the puzzle that I think come together nicely, including some of the examples you gave, which is so much of the learning that young people want to do, even beginning in that preteen phase, is about relationships. And they become emotionally charged relationships. And that's messy. It's really complicated. And that involves lots of different kinds of relationships and ambiguous relationships. They feel strongly. Is it a friend? Is it more than a friend? There's a lot of uncertainty. And so they need that, trial and error learning experience. And if that's done in a context of belonging, if it's done in a context of aligned motivations for something larger that you're trying to do together, then you work through every relationship. There's no relationship without working through conflicts and difficulties and calling each other. But if that's not framed in some larger positive way, it becomes a lot more difficult, or the stakes start feeling too scary. And so what are the things that promote that positive, safer version of learning by trial and error, different complex relationships? And they need lots of practice. It's like a toddler learning to walk, falling down 100 times a day and getting back up. I mean, it's the social relationship learning. And so the frameworks that create safety and alignment of motivations become powerfully important, and culture and community. And there's many large frames. But if we're not aware of those and the positive power to tip that balance to a good spiral, then we're missing those opportunities. And so you see organizations that are really good at it. They create a culture of it's safe enough to challenge each other in certain ways because you're aligned in other ways. Without that, it can, even with that, it can hit some bumpy spots. But again, we want to promote learning, and it's always about some combination of safety that lets the or promotes the exploration, but some risk and some falling down and getting back up. And so I think that's where feelings of belonging, feelings of larger purpose, connection, not that they think those words, but the feeling when you're in it together. And so and whether that's family, or family becomes a metaphor for a group that has that feeling, whether it's your sense of community at school. I think there's lots of ways that can be created, and those become really powerful to help that bumpy set of experiences of figuring out relationships, which is really at the heart of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so something I've been reflecting on, I know one of the themes we really wanted to touch upon is this idea of diversity and equity. And something I've really reflected on that I think everyone in this room would agree that we tend, as people who work with adolescents and people who study them, we tend to say, a little bit of risk-taking is healthy. It's a good thing. We try and promote it. And you brought up this idea that so much research was so negative, and now we're really leaning into, okay, a lot of this is there's these positive spirals. How do we communicate that message with the idea that not all adolescents face consequences equally, right? So how do we still promote healthy amount of risk-taking, exploration, this type of learning, while being sensitive to the fact that, while maybe a certain behavior will get someone a slap on the wrist, it might give another adolescent, might put them in the face of law enforcement or something, right? How do we really think about these questions and how we want to promote this while being sensitive to the fact that our culture doesn't actually promote it equally across adolescents? Jamila, I'll start with you. Or if whoever wants to go first, actually. This is a broader.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think something that we all struggle to kind of navigate through. I live in the land of acronyms, so when I'm thinking about our program, I'm thinking totally about our JEDI program, right? So that's justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, right? And so we create so many opportunities for social justice to be front and center in the work that we're doing. And I would say that in the last couple of years, that was primarily solely in our urban programs. and coming to the table and letting folks know that I think that that's a mistake, right? That we have to embed that in all of our programs. And so creating that really deep pipeline between all of our programs so that we create those spaces. And so now we do that in lots of different spaces. So we have a design team that's built of 4-H members, alumni, and extension educators, where they're looking at how do we create safe spaces, right? So for every single event that we host, there's more than likely going to be some sort of trauma that happens, as folks engage with one another, and we chronicle those things so that we can learn from them, not as a slap on the wrist, but so that we can do better next time. And we use those as teaching tools, right? So we do a whole lot of role playing, right? And we use those as real scenarios, right? For when people are like, oh my goodness, there are so many Black youth here. Are you all from New York City? No, we're not, right? So a microaggression, right? And so using those as teachable moments and opportunities for volunteers and educators and our young people, right? Looking at what some of those tangible outcomes can be in the long term, and doing those in safe environments where it's okay to make a mistake, it's okay to have that oops and ouch moment, and it's also okay to apologize and correct those things. And so that justice piece, that social justice piece has really been framed nicely as we move for everyone in our programs, for every single person. And so in our code of conduct, we've done a lot of work to make sure that it's embedded in there as a core value that we value diversity, equity, inclusion, and we create opportunities for that social justice to be embedded in our programs.
Ron, do you have anything to add?
Just one small thing to add to that is that I think what we're learning more and more about from the research, which fits completely with everything you said, is that so much of the risk-taking can be positive risk-taking. It's trying a new activity or taking a risk in a relationship, being part of a group, trying to master something that seems like a stretch. And so I think the space of risk-taking and failures doesn't need to be in the negative. And so making those opportunities more equitable, having multiple systems serving young people recognize the need to create more of those positive opportunities to find a path to ignite your passions, to link to this. Making that more equitable, I think, is one of the most important things we can do.
And I'll just jump in and say that it's super important for us to do our own work, right? For all of us to do our own identity work, to do that inner work before we enter into any spaces where we're engaging with young people. And so we make the space to make sure that our educators are doing that work prior to enter into those spaces, that our volunteers, our families are on board with doing that work as well, because it matters how we show up in those spaces. The spaces where we have included and excluded identities and making those things clear. Because by and large, what we know, what we feel, and how we feel about other people will bleed right into the space. And so whether we say it or not, it's in our actions, it's in how we communicate with folks. And so just making sure that we have that space, that deep space to do that deep work in and amongst ourselves, in diversity cohorts, and also integrated with our young people. So we have a group of teens and educators that will actually head to the FFA convention in the middle of the month to train FFA on how they can actually transition to doing some of this work too. And it starts with that deep inner work.
Definitely. Yeah. Okay, so that is time, and I really love that we ended on that note. So now we can turn to our tables and discuss thoughts about this and what we would add from our own experiences and what really stuck out to us. Thank you so much.